The neon fork outside the blue lantern hummed against the evening like a fly caught in amber, its glow washing the highway's cracked shoulder in an anemic pink. Inside, the diner's chrome trim reflected a parade of small-town ghosts, truckers with hands like maps, refinery guys with sulfur in their pores, a deputy who wore his badge like a fist. Kellen Rourke took the corner booth under a dead clock and a framed Polaroid of a softball team no one cheered for anymore. He set his coffee down without sipping and cataloged the room by habit: back kitchen entrance, office door with a warped jamb, a blind spot in the convex mirror above the pie case that could hide an entire body for 3 heartbeats. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow, I have a special story for you. The waitress moved like glass wrapped in cloth. She smiled by muscle memory, but the smile never reached past her cheekbones, never asked permission to live behind her eyes. The left cuff of her shirt was turned up too carefully, hiding something that made her keep that arm tucked against her ribs the way people shelter ribs after a bad crack. Kellen watched her slide a plate to an old farmer, the way her fingers trembled when the fork chimed, the way breath snagged and disappeared when the deputy laughed. He wrote meatloaf, black coffee on the order ticket and didn't sign a name. The waitress's name tag said Rhea with a second-hand flourish, the kind of flourish people practice at 15 on a notebook they'll throw away before graduation. The flourish had outlived something else. Kellen let his throat accept diner air before he let it accept coffee. Old grease. Pine cleaner. Cinnamon gum. He tasted a hint of wintergreen coming off the deputy's chew and something medicinal on the waitress herself, ibuprofen if he had to bet, but chasing bigger pain than it had permission to chase. The left sleeve didn't just sit wrong, the fabric was tenting over a quick and dirty brace someone had MacGyvered out of tongue depressors and sports tape. Not fresh. 48 hours, maybe 60, long enough for swelling to argue with the rap and for pride to argue with the body. He'd been a Hell's Angel longer than he'd been anything else worth naming, though the patch lived where no one here could see it, in the way his eyes took in exits, in the patience he wore like a second jacket, in the soft voice he could unsheath under the roar. Undercover didn't mean cop. It meant that sometimes you let the world think you were a harmless man with a trunk full of wholesale napkins and degreasers, the kind of salesman who learned names and kept none. It meant that when a woman in a blue-checked shirt used her right hand to steady a coffee pot she should have been able to carry left-handed in her sleep, you didn't just see injury, you saw the person who handed it to her. He didn't remember ordering, but the meatloaf arrived with gravy like late November rain. Rhea placed the plate so gently the china barely whispered against formica. "Hot plate," she said. Her mouth wanted to add a joke, her eyes vetoed it. "You all right to lift that?" he asked, and kept his voice in that calm, service station register that never scared anybody until it needed to. Rhea's gaze flicked to the office door as if the answer might be printed there. The deputy, at the counter, dragged a butter knife across toast with the joy of a man splitting a necktie he'd never liked. "Fine," she said. "Just clumsy." She tucked hair behind her ear and missed, pain rerouted the hand midair, and the hair fell forward again in a curtain. "Clumsy." Kellen nodded like it was weather. He had a scar at his collarbone he never bothered to hide, shaped like a crescent wrench that had slipped during a roadside fix 15 years and 2 lifetimes ago. It reminded him that everything people call clumsy has a name if you stand close enough to hear it. "Be careful with that pot," the deputy called without looking. The badge on his chest wasn't polished tonight, it was weaponized. He'd shaved the mustache, but not the attitude. The name tag read Loring. That name sounded like a door you keep your hand on in case you have to close it fast. "Yes sir," Rhea said. She didn't put fear into the syllables, she folded it under the napkin dispenser where nobody could prove it existed. Kellen was already building the map. 2 pinch points between booths. A decorative jukebox that weighed too much for one man to move without leverage but exactly enough for one man to pin another against if it came to that. No locks on the bathroom windows. The kitchen had a back door, he knew it by the draft that threaded the floor and kissed his boots. The office would have a safe, but the real safe tonight was conversational, and whoever ran this place had the combination. The man in the office was not a mystery. He appeared 2 minutes after Kellen decided he would, built like a second refrigerator, neck the shape of a clenched promise. He wore a denim shirt with a collar cut clean by a box cutter long ago, an old habit returned to for comfort. The man's belt sagged not from fat but from responsibility, keys, knife, pouch. He looked at Rhea the way a man looks at a leaking pipe he thinks he has a right to tighten. "Drop a glass, you pay for it," he told her, conversational as poison. "Insurance don't cover carelessness." "Sorry, Buck," she said, and the way her shoulders rounded under the apology made Kellen want to move too soon and ruin everything. Buck. Names mattered. Buck Weller. If the trophy photos by the register meant anything, the deer, the base, the truck as polished as his temper wasn't. Kellen gave the room another pass with his ears while he chewed meatloaf that tasted better than a man like Buck deserved to sell. A little girl in a red coat clicked the heels of her plastic boots together under a corner table. An old couple argued passive-aggressively about whether pie counted as supper. The deputy finished his toast, then lifted his coffee with the proprietary sigh of a man lifting a woman's wrist. When Rhea returned for the plate, Kellen let the words arrive like they were someone else's idea. "I know a man can splint a wrist, but he can't fix a reason." Her eyes cut to him hard, warning flaring bright under all the caution. "I'm fine," she said, and it would have been easier to believe if her pupils weren't dialed into fear's frequency. "Yeah," he said softly. "That's what bravery sounds like when it's tired." It earned him a thread of a smile, quick as a hummingbird. She set the check down, and with it the ordinary miracle that happens in places like this every night, the small faith that says someone will eat and pay and leave you unharmed. As her hand lifted, he saw it, the tell she hadn't meant to leave. The edge of tape under the cuff, not white now but breakfast coffee brown. The shadow of fingerprints bruised into the back of her hand where someone had held too tight, as if trying to shake the last hours out of her bones. "Trouble?" he asked the air. "No," she said with too much speed. Then, slower to correct the speed, "just a long day." The office door thumped. The deputy set his cup down. In a town like this, the gravity lived where the men's boots lived, and the boots tonight were moving. Kellen turned his cup just enough to see the reflection in the chrome band running the boot's edge. The deputy stood, hand ghosting the butt of his sidearm more like a gloat than a reach. Buck leaned one shoulder into the office doorframe as if the dining room were a porch. "You with the meatloaf," Buck said, his tone friendly the way a padded bat is friendly. "You new around here?" "Just passing through," Kellen answered. He gave the truth a haircut and sent it out into the world. "Sales route." "What kind?" Deputy Loring asked, like he could force the answer to embarrass itself. "Cleaners. Paper products. Things that help places run smooth." He smiled with the non-threat of a man prepared to show laminate samples. In the mirror strip, he watched Rhea's breath shallow out, her body preparing to be furniture for whatever came next. "Crazy how many messes people make," Buck said. "Even crazier how many think someone else ought to clean 'em." "I've found it's cheaper to fix a leak than to mop forever," Kellen said, and saw Rhea turn away to hide the way that line hit her ribs like a prayer. The first storm never shows on the horizon. It's a hand on an elbow. It's an extra beat of silence where laughter should be. Rhea reached for a tray and couldn't grip it. The ligament in her forearm tried to do a job bone should have done. The tray slid, 2 coffee cups pirouetting to the floor in a brittle, caffeinated bloom. The little girl in the red coat jumped. The old couple stopped arguing about pie. Loring's mouth smiled while his eyes stayed bored. Buck's chin lifted, not quite a nod, more like a lighthouse beam sweeping and finding what it expected. "This gonna come out of your check," Buck said, lazy, as if check meant something besides life. Kellen stood up slow enough for old men to approve of his manners. "I'll pay for it," he said levelly. I watched it happen. He put a 20 on the counter like the money was more for the quiet than the cups. Buck didn't look at the bill. "It's about responsibility, son." Funny. Son was a word that had gotten Kellen hit more often than kissed. He pocketed the irritation. "It's about a slick tile and gravity." He kept his tone medicinal, the kind people swallow without thinking. He turned to Rhea. "You okay?" Rhea was busy holding herself together molecule by molecule. "I'm fine," she repeated, and Kellen felt the fine crack across the word like ice starting to fail under weight no ice should be asked to carry. "Step away from my waitstaff," Buck said, but didn't move. Men like him liked boundary lines more than they liked truth. Loring drifted not quite casually to close the space until 3 people and 2 versions of authority breathed the same air. "You threatening her?" Kellen asked Buck, but he was watching Loring's hands. The deputy kept his right thumb hooked in the front of his belt, a schoolyard posture that still somehow put his hand closer to his holster than it needed to be. "Threat's an ugly word," Buck said, drier than the meatloaf edges. "This is supervision." "And that?" Kellen nodded toward Rhea's wrist, the bandage peeking through Complicity's sleeve. "Supervised injury?" Loring's mouth twitched. "Clumsy, like she said." He said it like scripture. "Clumsy," Kellen echoed, committing the word to a little cemetery where he buried lies that tried to pass as common sense. He could feel the angel patch like heat across his back even though the jacket he wore tonight carried nothing but dust. He thought about the men he loved like family, 2 states away, eating food that tasted like engines and laughter. He thought about the oath that had never needed a courtroom: take care of your own, take care of the ones nobody claims, and never paint over rot when you can pry up the board. Undercover didn't mean silent. It meant you picked the right room to speak in, and the right people to hear you. "Rhea," he said, and used her name like a bridge. "Do you want to step outside with me for 2 minutes, just to breathe air that isn't this?" He left the words open at both ends so she could walk through if she wanted. He did not rescue. He did not drag. He offered. Her mouth opened and closed. The deputy's presence was a thumb on her trachea. Buck's was gravity. "I can't," she said, and the way she glanced at the office told him the leash was in there, not on her. "Then I'll step out," Kellen said softly. "If you need 10 seconds of sky, I'll be where the neon fork drips on the asphalt." He took out cash for the meal, left it under the salt shaker, then palmed a business card that meant nothing: Rourke Supply, Fontana, California, and wrote 3 words on the back before anyone could tell the pen to stop. "Sunday Shelter." He slid it to the edge of the table and didn't look to see if it vanished. Things vanish differently when watched. Outside, the night was made of diesel and cicadas. Kellen breathed until his heartbeat lost its drumline. He popped the trunk of the rental. Boxes of napkins, true enough. 2 cases of contractor bags. A roll of gaffer's tape. 3 soft flannel shirts that read neutral. You could build a life on neutral if you needed to. Under the shirts, carefully hidden but instantly reachable, were other choices: a med kit built for nights people don't plan, a pair of soft cuffs no one in law enforcement would recognize, and the small, ugly weight of a pistol he had carried across 10 borders of legality. Undercover didn't mean suicidal. He tapped a contact on an old phone that didn't know his real life. It rang twice. A voice answered that had traveled across more miles than prayer. "Yeah. Pilgrim's Gate," Kellen said. The code was old, a relic of years when they used churches as rendezvous because they were the only buildings open when the world closed. "How many?" the voice asked. "Steal under kindness. Hold a convoy," he said. "Bring open eyes and closed mouths. No colors. Family night. Time? As close to now as you can make it." A breath on the other end. "You sure?" He looked through the diner window, where Rhea refilled the deputy's coffee by leaning as far away as physics allowed a human body to lean without dropping out of sight. "Yeah," he said, and let the conviction take the air back out of the night. "I'm sure." "Copy. Keep your head." The line died. You could trust a man whose goodbye saved its breath for arrival. Kellen closed the trunk and moved back toward the door, then paused, catching motion at the gas pumps. A pickup he'd clocked earlier idled under the jaundiced lights, its driver just a silhouette and a ball cap at the edge of visibility. He wasn't buying gas. He was buying time. The plate was half muddied, but the county sticker was visible: Mercer County. Rhea had used that name when an older woman in a booth had asked where she was from. The word had landed heavy, as if it had been a door she'd once walked through and now feared to find open behind her. Kellen went back in when the deputy laughed again, because sometimes laughter is an alarm bell dressed as a reward. The bell over the door made everyone pretend they hadn't been listening for the return. He slid into his booth, not to hide but because a seated man is the last man you suspect of being dangerous. Rhea came to him like the river comes to the bend. Up close, the strain in her face looked like a handwriting sample from a tired saint. "You left this," she whispered without moving her mouth, and the card was back on the table under the menu. "They read everything. Even trash." He nodded, unoffended by failure. Offers, he'd learned, should come like rain. If the ground is ready, it drinks. If it isn't, the water still finds somewhere low and patient to wait. He slid the card back with his index finger until it fell into his lap. With the same motion he wrote another phrase under the table edge with the disposable pen and left that where only the desperate ever look, taped to the underside of the formica, right where a hand-shaking hopelessness would rest if it needed to borrow a moment. "Raise sugar twice if you want out." It was insane, relying on a sugar shaker for signal. It was precise. People in control never noticed the rituals of service. He pushed his coffee away, untasted, and waited to see if Courage wore an apron tonight. The office door opened and closed twice with the rhythm of the place taking a breath around a belt. A man he hadn't seen yet entered and changed the air. Younger than Buck by a decade, older than Loring by a story. Cropped hair. Jaw from a recruitment poster. His knuckles were almost healed from something that had been big enough to brag about to the wrong ears. He sat at the counter and pretended not to watch Rhea work. His pretense had the clumsy grace of a man who thinks no one sees him steal. "Kate," Loring said by way of greeting that was almost a threat. "Not a county. A person." The cap on the man at the pump turned and gave Kellen the rest of the shape to pour the name into. Cade Mercer. The kind of name that made high school coaches and county judges both lean forward. "Your uncle says hey," Loring went on, casual gun. "Wants to know if you handled all that." Cade's mouth cut a small, proud line. Handled. Rhea's hand shook once and stilled like a bird realizing the sky wasn't safe today. "Maybe don't talk business in front of customers," Buck cut in, as if the only sin at issue was decorum. But Kellen heard the quiet threat of fear in it, too. Men who run little empires know better than to whistle in the dark when storm fronts roll. Kellen let his gaze fall to his phone and pretended to scroll a list that didn't exist, thumb blind texting 4 words to a number that had known him under 3 different names. "Hurry. Bring quiet." The door opened again and a crossbreeze wrote a new sentence across the diner's floor, one made of night and road and the specific smell of men who ride their weather instead of obeying it. Kellen didn't look. Looking would be the same as pointing. He let the air register in his blood. It felt like home trying not to show itself. Rhea moved to the sugar caddy to straighten it because that's what you do when everything else is breaking, you make 1 square inch of the world obey. Her right hand lifted the shaker with the confidence of a person who believes gravity and goodwill are loosely related. She set it down. Lifted it again. Set it down. The first time looked like work. The second time looked like a message. Kellen rose without making the act into theater. "Restroom?" he asked nobody, then cut through the staff corridor past the no admittance sign that had always functioned like a dare. The kitchen was the house's second heart, beating hard and hot. Dishwater hissed. The walk-in freezer exhaled its winter. He found the back door with his shoulder like a dog finds a remembered gate. Outside, the man at the pump had relocated his hands inside his jacket. That was information Kellen accepted by not reacting to it. The alley's asphalt held ancestral oil. Beyond the dumpster, someone's foot scuffed once, then stilled in the universal language of "you didn't hear that." He waited against the bricks until the kitchen door breathed open behind him. Rhea slid out sideways, the way injured people move when they refuse to be victims but are tired of pretending physics is optional. Her face could have been a map of a county you don't drive through when you're late. "I have 10 seconds, she said, voice low and fast, "and then Buck'll send Toby to check and I'll be dead a different way." Okay, Kellen said, refusing to spend any of her seconds on questions she didn't bring. I'm Kellen. I'm here. She nodded like those 6 words weighed enough to put the world back on its axis. He broke it yesterday, she said, and didn't have to say who he was. Said I made him look small when I wouldn't ride in his truck with him. Uncle's the sheriff, there ain't a soul in Mercer County who doesn't pretend his nephew is a good boy. Buck lets me work off the debt for the window Cade broke throwing me through. But Buck keeps adding new numbers I ain't wrote down. She swallowed, went pale, kept talking. I tried to leave. Badge boy brought me back. He said next time he'd escort me with cuffs. The laugh that followed was a mistake her mouth made because it didn't have time to file for permission. Do you want help? Kellen asked. He didn't say rescue. People ask for that when they're allowed to. She wasn't. I want out, she said. The words felt like the first honest thing anyone had said in the county since spring. But if I go, they'll ruin my sister. What's your sister's name? Marin. The name looked like a porch light turning on in a dark row of houses. She's 17. She thinks the world is big enough for both of us. Kate thinks otherwise. Where is she tonight? At the church, folding bulletins with Mrs. Darnell because she believes in Sundays more than the people who talk the loudest about them. Rhea's mouth did the beginning of a smile before pulling it back to safety. Mrs. Darnell don't scare easy. Good. Names, places, routes. If I pull you now, can you get to the church without being clocked? Through the pines behind the car wash. She looked toward the alley mouth. But I can't pull me. Not with Loring and Buck and Kate all smelling like they own things that ain't theirs. Okay, Kellen said again, and this time the word meant a plan. When you go back in, knock over the tray in the far corner by the jukebox. I'll give them something else to look at so you can take the kitchen door. 10 seconds of noise is all I need. Her eyes searched his face for the lie. He let them find nothing but road and intent. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Not grateful. Suspicious of miracles. Because I am the son of men who taught me that helping is a better way to use your hands than hurting. Because I have stood in rooms where women said fine until the word fell apart and nobody in the room bent to pick it up. Because I carry 30 pounds of road on my heart and I need some place to put it down tonight. Because cleaning up spills is my line of work, he said instead, and let her grin at the small mercy of a joke that wasn't. The door bumped. Rhea slid in a head of panic and did what people in danger do when they've decided living is a better story to tell than dying. She acted normal. Kellen rounded the building to the front like he belonged to it. Inside, he let his shoulder pick a fight with the jukebox. The old machine wobble danced, grumbled awake, then toppled with the melodramatic inevitability of a soap opera climax. A dozen 45s shrieked in their sleeves. For one theatrical, delicious second, everyone watched nostalgia die. Jesus! Buck bellowed, surging forward. Sorry, Kellen said as if that could fix any of the broken things in the room. He found Loring's hand halfway to his gun and gave the deputy a look so mild it could water houseplants. You aiming to shoot a jukebox with a public record? Beyond the slice of door that framed the staff hall, Rhea ran. Not a sprint. The stealthy, efficient run of a waitress who knows how to ghost behind bar stools. The kitchen swallowed her. Cade's stool scraped. Where's she going? He asked the air, then didn't wait for an answer. He took 2 steps meant to add up to 20. Kellen tilted sideways into his path like he'd been born to block men from doors. Hey, Kellen said, a word both harmless and armed. You got something in your eye. He lifted a hand, casually, like a brother or a barber. Cade flinched from the unexpected intimacy, that little country hardwired panic that says don't touch my face, and the moment hiccuped. Rhea flitted past the far window, a shadow too careful to be wind. Kellen gave the jukebox another theatrical nudge so the little girl in the red coat squealed with delight and half the diners turned. Buck shouted something about liability and the cost of records you can't even buy anymore. Loring decided to be a cop and not a man for 3 seconds and barked at Kellen to sit down. Kellen sat, and in the act of sitting his foot hooked Cade's ankle a hair off balance. Cade swore. The window over the kitchen door hiccuped night. The back door breathed out and in. Rhea was gone. There is a special hush that falls over a room when the control it swore it had slips like a ring off cold fingers. Loring heard it and chose violence clothes. He yanked his gun and turned toward the staff corridor, not to aim but to declare. Buck's face went the color of wet flour. She ran, Cade said, like reporting a crime and a betrayal and a weather forecast. Sit, Loring barked at everyone not involved in his plan, and the old man with the pie said he had a bad knee and wouldn't be doing any sitting unless someone helped him. The little girl laughed at the gun because she hadn't met the world that taught you not to. Rhea's absence turned the room into a set built around it. Kellen stood slowly, palms out, the way you show a rabid dog you know it's a dog and not a storm. Badge, he said quietly to Loring. You really want witnesses for whatever you do next? Or you want to step outside and be the good guy you pretend to be? He didn't believe in magic words, but some words make certain kinds of men forget which story they're in. Loring raised the gun halfway to Kellen's face as if the extra 12 inches of air it covered carried a bonus check. Sit down, he repeated, and Kellen heard the tremor hiding under the command like a violin string tuned to break. Doors turn rooms into calculus. The front door opened again and the equation changed. This time the night rode in unapologetic. Headlights swept the booths in a long, slow arc. An engine idled with all the patience of a church that never runs out of hymns. The sound pulled at something in Kellen's bones that had never learned to obey walls. Loring didn't notice. He had tunnel vision, the kind you get taught by your own pride. He moved down the staff corridor with Cade in his wake. Buck fumbled for the phone. Kellen stepped into the aisle with a decision that felt like sunlight. He followed the gun. Behind the kitchen, the alley was a choke point between brick and a chain-link fence that had learned too many tattoos of boys' sneakers. The dumpster hunched like a man ashamed of his smell. The freezer door threw its white breath into heat. Rhea huddled between two pallets, eyes wide and holy with the realization that fear is a teacher that never forgets your name. Stop right there. Loring shouted, the words pinging off metal and meat. End of the line, sweetheart. Cade's breath came eager. Get up. He advanced 2 steps too many for a man who believes in his own invulnerability. Kellen stepped between the gun and the lungs meant for it. He didn't make a speech. The freezer's hum became a choir. The alley's night tilted its head to hear. Move, Loring said. No, Kellen said gently, and because he said it like weather, it felt like weather. The first punch came not from the men but from the universe, the power kicked, and the neon fork's glow hiccuped, and for half a heartbeat the alley went ink dark. When the light returned, it returned with company. Engines. Not 1. Not 3. A gathering of thunder outside the diner that made the jars on the prep shelf shiver in their skins. Loring's eyes flicked toward the front for the first time since he'd forgotten windows could be eyes. The sound of bikes does something to men raised by ashen radios. It reminds them the world is wider than their county. It reminds them the road doesn't care what your uncle does for a living. Cade swore. What is that? Kellen didn't answer. He held Loring's gaze and let the deputy read the thing crawling out of Kellen's comm. Then he reached up, very slowly, and with 2 fingers tilted the barrel of the gun a degree toward the ground. Loring led him in spite of himself, that small obedience telling a bigger story about who had already lost. From the alley mouth, light poured like water. Headlamps knifed the dark into ribbons. Boots hit asphalt in a rhythm Kellen's heart already knew. Leather whispered secrets about loyalty. Somebody killed an engine and the silence that followed it was the kind you hear right before a prayer. Rhea's voice came so quiet it almost chose not to be a voice. Who are you? Just a man who cleans up spills, Kellen murmured back, and in his mouth the lie and the truth found a way to share a chair. Loring took 1 step back because sometimes retreat is the only way a man can hear what his fear is spelling. Buck appeared behind him, face panicked at the sight of the night turning into a congregation. Cade reached under his jacket for a pride he'd been polishing since he was 13 and found nothing there that could help him. The alley's far end bloomed with the shadows of men who weren't here to be loud. No colors, like he'd asked. No rows of red and white on display. But it was in the way they filled the negative space, in the way the engines obeyed not traffic but blood. One rider stepped forward, his gloved hand tapping twice on the metal edge of the door as if testing the soundness of a promise. Kellen felt the years he'd carried roll off his shoulders and land in the diesel, in the grit, in the simple fact of friends. He didn't turn. Undercover doesn't gawk at its own luck, but he let his voice travel like a lifeline. "Rhea," he said without moving, "when I tell you to run, you run to the man who looks like your father would have if he'd had time to soften. He'll say your name. He already knows it. You go with him and don't look back." "How will I know him?" she asked, and the question broke something fragile and repaired it in the same breath. "You'll know," Kellen said, and meant it. "There are faces the hunted recognize, the ones that look at you like you're a person and not a problem, like a door you're allowed to walk through." Rhea shifted, barely, testing courage the way a child tests ice with one foot. Loring brought the gun up again, finding his roll too late and too wrong. Cade charged past the barrel because rage never learned to read. And from the front lot, over the hiss of the freezer and the deputy's mistimed heroism, the diner walls carried a sound that made Kellen's teeth ache with gratitude, a single, clear horn, 3 slow notes, then the sudden flood of engines falling quiet in unison like 30 hearts agreeing on what came next. Next. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now, back to the story. The horn's last note hung in the alley like a full stop the night refused to honor. For a breath, nobody moved. Loring's gun paused between authority and mistake, Cade's shoulders squared to a fight he'd never had to finish himself, Buck's mouth asking the dark to remember who paid the light bill. Kellen felt every mile he'd ridden slide into place like a bolt finally finding thread. The engines in the lot idled down in perfect unison, not as a threat, but as a sentence with its subject understood. "Deputy," Kellen said softly, and the word felt like chalk on a blackboard before the lesson starts. "You've aimed enough at the wrong things for one night." He reached again, slower than apology, and turned the barrel a second degree toward the oil-stained ground. Loring let it happen because men who love the mirror hate the camera. In front of witnesses, he had to choose the version of himself he could stand to watch later. Cade took a step, then another, boots loud with inheritance. "She runs, she pays," he said. The words came out like he'd practiced them in a truck cab where the only audience was a steering wheel and a bad song. "My uncle isn't here," Kellen finished for him, gentle as a mercy killing. He didn't look toward the lot. He didn't need to. The alley's mouth held a silence made of men who don't need to be introduced to be recognized. He heard a zipper rasp, someone taking off gloves, and the small cough of leather settling as weight shifted from one boot to the other. The rhythm said family, the kind that makes law remember what it forgot. Behind the pallets, Rhea exhaled like air was something she'd been renting and could finally afford to buy. A figure stepped into the frame of headlights at the alley's end and stopped there, letting the light draw his edges in honest lines. Broad-shouldered. Beard salted by weather, not trend. No patch on his chest because he'd heard the request and honored it, but the way space made room for him said enough. He didn't speak first. He scanned, gun, girl, the wrong kind of young man, the right kind of old problem. His eyes found Kellen and asked a question that had already been answered on the phone. "Tomas," Kellen said, his voice refusing to rise. "Names are bridges, too." Tomas lifted one hand in greeting that doubled as permission. "Evenin'," he told the alley, and the words spread a quiet over the trash and the heat and the fear. He looked at Rhea like she wasn't a complication but a person. "Rhea." He said her name like he'd been rehearsing it all the way from the county line. She flinched. Not from him. From being seen. "You're coming with me, girl," Cade snapped, finding volume where evidence ought to be. "Now." Tomas didn't look at him. He addressed Loring, as if speaking to the badge instead of the boy trying to wear it. "You plan to aim that at a woman with a broken arm in front of 30 witnesses?" The question didn't leer. It sat down where courage lives. Back up, Loring barked, regaining a step of the ground his fear had leased to patience. All of you back the hell up or I will. Make a choice you don't get to take back, Kellen interposed, still with that soft, maddening calm. He didn't raise his hands any higher, he didn't need to. He tilted his head a fraction, enough to draw Loring's eyes away from Rhea and toward the place where choices multiply. You think the world ends at your county line because your uncle's number shows up when folks dial 3 digits? That's sheriff, not uncle, Loring said, but the correction rang like a bell in a church that forgot its songs. Tomas moved once, just once, and somehow ended up filling the space between the alley and the lot, his presence a dam the night was glad to have. We're taking her to ground where you don't get to choose the vocabulary, he said. Church'll do. Church don't outrank law, Cade muttered, stepping toward the pallets. Kellen watched the angle of his approach, the reach of his right hand, the heavy swing of his shoulders. He didn't see the boy's face. He saw vectors. He moved, simple as breath. An open palm to Cade's sternum borrowed the boy's momentum and handed it back like it was change on a counter. Cade stumbled into the freezer door with a noise pride makes when it meets math. Kellen was already between him and the space where Rhea had to pass. Go, he said without looking, and Rhea went. She shot from behind the pallets and ran not with panic but with the economy of a woman who's memorized the geography of pain. Tomas stepped aside and let her choose the path, then fell in a half step behind without touching her, the way you run with a wild thing you refuse to tame. Loring swore and jerked the gun up to find someone he had permission to hurt. The barrel swung right to left like a man's guilt. Kellen's hand was there before the aim could finish being born, 2 fingers on the slide, heel of the palm under the trigger guard, wrist twist that changed the story the way a key changes water to song. The gun came free into the night with a sound like a simple mistake. He didn't point it. He popped the mag with his thumb, racked the slide to send the chambered round dinging into a puddle, and set the empty piece gently on top of the dumpster as if he were returning a child's toy. Badge, he said again, soft enough to be mistaken for prayer. Be who you think you are. Somewhere near the front of the diner, someone clapped once, a single incredulous laugh escaping the old couple as if the world had written a joke that finally landed after decades of rehearsal. Buck looked around for authority and found only men, and not the kind he could invoice. You can't just, he started. Kellen was already moving backwards out of the alley, keeping himself between heat and target. The lot bloomed open. Rhea reached the bikes and stopped, sudden and stunned, because the sight of 30 men who arrived for you and not for themselves does something to a body that's only ever been fetched by trouble. Tomas tipped his chin at the nearest rider, a Pacific Northwesterner with hands like cedar roots. Javi. Hootie. Javi peeled a gray pullover from a saddlebag and held it out to Rhea without stepping too close, like handing someone a choice. She took it with her right hand, winced as the cuff caught on the tape under her sleeve, and let the fabric erase the evidence Buck and Loring loved more than justice. You ride? Tomas asked. Behind my daddy, she said automatically, then flinched at the past tense. He's gone. Okay, Tomas said as if the word could bear grief as easily as orders. He pointed to the back seat of a low, patient bike that looked like it had more miles than birthdays. This one's mine. You get on when you're ready. Cade lunged into the lot with nothing left in his toolkit but volume. Loring followed, breath ragged, suddenly a man with hands and no plan. He saw the line of bikes and made the rookie mistake of thinking he'd stumbled on a display. He reached for the empty gun atop the dumpster and found the mag's absence the way a liar finds his own echo. This is kidnapping, he declared, but even his voice didn't believe it. Kellen kept moving till he felt the warmth of headlamps on his back. He didn't take his eyes off Loring. She asked for out, he said. The law's supposed to know what consent sounds like, even when it whispers. Buck had the phone in his ear, muttering the sheriff's name like repeating it could conjure the man. Behind the counter inside, the little girl in the red coat pressed her nose to the glass and watched the lot fill with a story she'd try to tell at school on Monday and be told to hush about. Rhea, Tomas said again, quiet as Sunday. Ready? She nodded, once, and climbed onto the pillion like a woman stepping onto the first porch in the first town anyone ever built decent. Her knees shook. She held herself still by force of a will that had been spotted, bruised, but not broken. Sirens are just voices raised by machines. They found the night now, far enough to be hope, close enough to be warning. Loring puffed up like he'd been the one to request accompaniment. "You're done," he said to the air and the men who knew how not to take that personally. Tomas rolled his shoulders like he was easing a door out of a swollen frame. "We're leaving," he replied. He didn't rev the engine. He didn't make a show. He looked at Kellen, and in that look were 10,000 miles of the same road seen from two different saddles. "You coming?" Kellen glanced back toward the diner once and saw the inside world, pie breathing, coffee cooling, Buck calculating, the old farmer setting a hand over his wife's knuckles. He felt his chest hitch, the way it used to before kickoff under lights that smelled like mothballs in autumn. Not fear. Readiness. "Yeah," he said. "I'm coming." They moved out not like a parade but like a decision. Engines turned from sound into motion. The bikes rolled in a staggered two-beat, leaving space for mistakes and faith. Kellen took the sweep, last in line by choice, which is where a man stands when he's making sure no wolf nips the lamb's heel. Behind them, Loring shouted into a radio and then at their backs. Cade ran alongside the convoy for 3 foolish seconds, his hand scraping chrome while his pride screamed. Buck's voice, fainter than money but louder than love, tried to climb the night and couldn't. They took the side streets by muscle memory Kellen hadn't practiced in this town but had in 100 others designed by the same lazy city engineer. The church, the same white-clabbered smile every county pastored, rose up at the end of Pine and Third like someone had sketched hope with a dull pencil and never bothered to erase. Lights were on in the fellowship hall. Kellen could smell coffee and the kind of laundry soap Mrs. Darnell liked. He didn't know her but he knew her. There are women the road teaches you by type. They wheeled into the lot as the first cruiser came around the corner with more ceremony than accuracy. Tomas swung his leg off and stood between Rhea and the world, not hiding her, not displaying her, just existing like a fact authority had to absorb before it could continue. The church door opened. An older woman stepped out with a stack of bulletins against her hip, glasses on a chain and a posture that could stop a flood with a look. Beside her, a girl with Rhea's mouth and Ocean's more innocence held a roll of tape in both hands like it was the baton in a relay she didn't want to lose. "Marin," Rhea breathed, and the name turned her knees into a story the asphalt wasn't soft enough to read gently. The sisters met halfway between door and lot. There is a sound families make when they reform a shape that violence has been trying to memorize for practice. It isn't sobbing or singing. It's something older. Kellen let it pass through him like static and signal both. Mrs. Darnell took one look at the sling that wasn't and made the mama noise. "Inside," she ordered, not raising her voice, not asking permission from law or night. "Now. We'll get ice and a lawyer." "Lawyer?" Marin squeaked, eyes huge. "We can't afford." "Child," the older woman said, her voice an organ note under a choir, "you don't call the price on justice before you call for justice." She turned to Tomas and Kellen and the men behind them, appraising without flattery. "You ain't here for trouble," she decided. "You're here to keep it from walking inside my narthex. That's fine. But there'll be no boots on my fellowship hall floor." "Ma'am," Tomas said, and somehow made the word an oath. He jerked his chin. 30 men peeled their boots off and lined them under the eaves like schoolboys told by a teacher they'd die for if asked. The cruiser's door opened on a schedule set by ego. A younger deputy than Loring, fresh shave, fresh fear, stepped out and immediately realized the world had gotten bigger while he was upgrading his ringtone. Loring's unit slid in behind, siren dying with theatrical regret. The 2 lawmen squared themselves like the front of a parade. "Church property," Mrs. Darnell announced, hands on hips, as if she'd been waiting all her life to say the spell and mean it. "You want in, you come civil. You want to drag a girl out who asked for help, you better have more than a badge and a last name." "Ma'am, we have reports," Loring began. "And I have eyes," she shot back. And a phone that calls the state line if the county one keeps rerouting to your uncle's pride. The younger deputy wavered. He looked at Marin, at Rhea cradling her bandaged wrist, at the men who were suddenly barefoot and therefore harder to cast as wolves. He swallowed and found his voice smaller than the night required. There's procedures. Good, Mrs. Darnell said. Follow every one. Tomas stepped closer to Kellen, his words meant only for 2 pairs of ears. We can hold them, he murmured. But holding ain't the same as healing. She needs a doc not on their Christmas list, and she needs records that don't go missing. I got a clinic 2 counties over, a writer from the back said quietly. His voice carried New Mexico dust. Docs their treat bone before reputation. Cash talks, but not the kind that leaves ink. Kellen nodded. We'll need a plan that survives daylight, he answered. We can run all night, but morning belongs to paper. Inside the hall, Rhea sat while Mrs. Darnell snipped through tape as carefully as unlacing a wedding dress someone never should have been forced into. Marin held a styrofoam cup of ice like an offering. This is gonna hurt, the older woman warned. It already does, Rhea said, and then apologized for the truth. The first sound the hall heard through the cracked open window was not a siren. It was sandals on linoleum. Pastor Jenkins appeared with a stack of hymnals and an expression that mixed fear with a recipe for courage he kept in the same drawer as spare candles. We are a sanctuary, he said, testing the word like supplies after a hurricane. We will be as holy as we decide to be. Kellen watched from the doorway. The threshold is natural habitat, inside enough to care, outside enough to act. He took out the old phone and thumbed a message with the economy he reserved for moments he couldn't afford to crowd. Proof. Need it. The reply pinged back before the second hand finished its loop. From a woman in another town who turned small town rot into court exhibits for breakfast. Who's dirty, who's scared, who's ready to talk? He sent 3 names. Then, on second thought, he sent a 4th, the 15-year-old dishwasher in the diner kitchen whose eyes had followed the argument the way kids watch storms from under beds. While Loring argued jurisdiction with a woman whose jurisdiction was casseroles and funerals, Cade made the worst move available to him. He tried to force his way past Tomas into a building that smelled like VBS paint and old lilies. Tomas didn't shove him. He shifted 1 foot and let physics do what anger never learned. Cade's shoulder collided with a door jamb that had seen more sins than this and refused to move for them. You got no right, Cade hissed, rubbing his arm. She's mine. Kellen stepped into the boy's line of sight and used the one tool that works on a man who thinks possession and love share an address. He offered him the future. Here's what happens if you keep that sentence, he said, voice as plain as roadkill. You spend 5 years learning the word restraining, 3 years unlearning the word uncle, and the rest of your life using used to like it's a job. Or. He let the word hang like a bridge he wasn't going to cross for him. You walk away right now and learn nobody's yours except you. You got a slim chance of getting to keep the pieces of yourself you might like later. Cade laughed, high and brittle. Boys who call themselves men hate being read. Who the hell are you? Kellen thought about answers that sounded like legend and chose the one that did the most work with the least light. A man who knows math, he said. And the shortest distance between who you are and who you could be. It didn't land. Sometimes wisdom misses on purpose so the fool can catch up later. Cade spat 2 feet shy of boots good enough to run his mouth over and stepped back into the embrace of a county that had always made room for him even when rooms were full. Tomas checked the line of men without turning his head. We don't escalate, he said, not a suggestion. We stand. They push, we absorb. They threaten, we name. We don't give this pastor blood on his floor to mop. The state trooper arrived like a grown-up walking into a schoolyard fight. He got out slow, shut his door like an argument ended, and took in the geometry, bikes, boots, church lady, 2 deputies on the same radio frequency as shame. He tipped his hat to Mrs. Darnell. Ma'am. Then to Pastor Jenkins. Reverend. He turned to Loring last. Deputy. The demotion held. I'll be taking statements, he said, pen already out. All of them. Separate. Loring opened his mouth. Closed it. Nodded so small it looked like he was chasing a fly. "Ma'am," the trooper said to Rhea after she'd been settled with a sling repurposed from a choir robe and the sharp mercy of real ice, "do you wish to remain here?" She looked at Marin, at Mrs. Darnell, at the men standing in their socks in a row like boys in church who hadn't been able to afford new shoes for Easter but showed up anyway. "I wish to leave Mercer County," she said. "And I wish to do it with my sister. And I wish to say where I'm going to nobody who has a key to anything but their own front door." He wrote it down exactly. "Then that's what we'll make happen." He kept writing. "And do you intend to press charges?" Rhea looked at her wrist. At Kellen. At Marin's hand squeezing her knee hard enough to bruise belief into place. "I intend to be believed," she said. "And I intend for him to stop calling me his." The trooper nodded like a man who had daughters and had wrestled the world for them in smaller, less public rooms. "That's the kind of charge that sticks," he said. By midnight, affidavits wore the church's folding tables like extra tablecloths. Mrs. Darnell produced notary stamps like they were potholders she kept in the same drawer. Javi took pictures of Rhea's bruises with hands steady enough to rebuild carburetors, his phone timestamping the truth so no sheriff's nephew could sand it off later. Pastor Jenkins prayed without making a speech about it. When the last page had bled its last ink, Tomas turned to Kellen and let the road back into his eyes. "Clinic," he said. "Clinic," Kellen agreed. He made the call. The voice on the other end said the door would be open around back and the lights would be low and no one would sign anything that smelled like fear disguised as insurance. They rolled out again when the church's night finally remembered how to fold itself quiet. A skeleton crew stayed, a couple of riders with coffee and cards, Mrs. Darnell with a baseball bat you could not pay her to put down, the trooper filling out a report so clean the state would have to frame it. Kellen swept once more, the shadow at the tail of the train, eyes counting heads and threats and blessings. They took the long way, roads that ran between corn stubble and the kind of forests where teenagers go to name themselves. The air bit their faces with October's honesty. Rhea leaned into Tomas's back like belief was muscle memory coming home. Marin rode with Javi, her fingers white on the strap, her laughter small and shocked and true when a barn cat launched itself out of a ditch like the night had produced it as a joke. At the clinic, a woman in green scrubs let them in with the competence of a saint who retired from miracles to practice medicine. "Room 3, she said. "You, sit. You, sit. You," a finger at Kellen, "don't pace and make my nurses nervous." Rhea's wrist was x-rayed, cleaned, and wrapped with the dignity of a broken thing told it wasn't a synonym for ruin. The doctor clicked her tongue a few times the way people do when anger is a medical instrument. "Not the first time this arm took a hit," she said. "You don't deserve a second." "I know," Rhea said. The words sounded new in her mouth and immediately perfect. Kellen stood in the hallway reading the linoleum like an after-action report. Tomas leaned against a vending machine as if gravity had asked him to cover its brake. Javi doled out candy bars like communion. "You did good," Tomas said finally, not looking at Kellen, which is the way men tell each other the truth when the truth would get embarrassed by eye contact. "I did what I could," Kellen answered. "Same thing sometimes." He wanted to argue but didn't. He let the quiet come, and in it he heard the small click of his life shifting a half-tooth on the gear, bringing some new chain into alignment. By dawn, Marin had a duffel bag she'd never packed because Mrs. Darnell had kept it in her closet since before Marin was born, labeled for when. Rhea had a sling and a painkiller and a number for a victim's advocate who did not live in a county with a sheriff shaped like a family tree. The trooper had a file that would knock on a DA's door like a man with good news and a warrant. Loring had a report he couldn't quite make lie without breaking a law he wasn't ready to break on paper. Kate had a bruise the color of consequence and a mouth full of words that tasted like pennies. They gathered at the clinic's side door near the dumpster that smelled better than the diners because nobody skimped on bleach here. The sky was the color of steel before fire wakes it. Rhea looked at the horizon like a witness turned prophet, then turned to Kellen. "What happens when we cross the county line?" she asked. "Not fear." Logistics. You keep going, he said. We ride a while with you. Long enough for your Uncle Sheriff to get tired of pretending he doesn't see the state in his rear view. He tipped his chin toward Tomas. He's got a place. Soft landing. Women with hands that fix more than cars. Men who'll teach Marin how to patch a tire and how to say no with her whole throat. And you? Marin asked, innocence sharpening courage into a better knife. What do you do next? Kellen lifted his shoulders and let them fall. There's a diner with a jukebox that owes a little girl a song, he said. And a deputy who needs to learn how to be the size of his badge. He didn't add, and a boy who'll either become a man or become a headline. Some prophecies don't deserve airtime. They rode. The county line didn't bulge or fight. It watched them leave like a man who knows he's mislaid something valuable and can't remember where. The road west opened like a palm waiting to bless or catch. They took it. 2 hours later, after safety settled in a room over Tomas's shop where the air smelled like oil and clean cotton, after Rhea fell asleep mid-sentence and Marin wrote a list with the seriousness of a general, change school, get DOC records, learn TO drive stick, Kellen turned his front tire back east. The sun sat up and laughed the way it does when it realizes people plan as if it can be scheduled. Tomas rolled up alongside, a question in the angle of his helmet. You sure? No, Kellen said honestly. But I'm going anyway. Call if the road gets mean. It's always mean. Kellen smiled. That's what makes it interesting. They split at the crossroads with a gloved handshake that wasn't goodbye. Tomas went back to the shop and the new lives he'd just agreed to host. Kellen went back to a diner he had no reason to love except a girl in a red coat who needed a story that ended with music. The Blue Lantern didn't pretend surprise at seeing him. The Neon Fork hummed any hour you asked. Buck was at the register pecking at buttons like they'd offended him personally. The little girl wasn't there, school had her. The Dish Kid stood taller than yesterday, as if filings of courage had magnetized together overnight. Loring sat at the counter not drinking coffee on purpose. Back already? Buck said, voice oily with the courage that comes from daylight and a counting machine. Forgot my receipt, Kellen said. He slid into the same booth and let the chrome mirror give him everybody's face at once. Loring turned his stool a quarter turn. You think last night changes anything? He asked. Not mockery. Curiosity dressed like warning. Kellen met his eyes without sharpening his own. I think last night changed everything for the only people who matter. He let the sentence rest. You ever been that for anybody, deputy? The Dish Kid snorted, bad timing, miraculous bravery. Loring's jaw tightened, then loosened like a man unclenching after realizing the punch was meant for someone else. Buck puffed up. You caused a riot, he announced. I got damages. I got pictures, Kellen replied, and put his phone on the table like he was setting down a baby whose nap you refused to risk. Of bruises you didn't see because counting tips is a full-time job. He slid the phone toward Loring, not Buck. Of a gun that got safer once it left your hand. Loring stared at the images that were not quite visible from where Kellen sat. He didn't flinch. He didn't apologize. He nodded, once, and the motion looked like a man bowing to a fact. The bell over the door announced someone who'd practiced their entrance in a mirror with a badge pinned to a t-shirt. Sheriff Mercer came in with shoulders like Barnes, big and empty. Cade slunk behind, his mouth already writing checks he didn't have the charisma to cash. Sheriff took one look around and knew he was late to his own party. You, he told Kellen, not hiding the ownership he used on verbs. Out. Breakfast, Kellen said, because you can't throw a man out for ordering eggs without revealing something about yourself to the morning crowd. And a song for a kid. This ain't a playground, Mercer said. It's a place of business. Then do some, Kellen replied. Start with protecting your citizens from your family. He wanted to say it quieter. He wanted to say it in a room without a witness. But some truth needs an audience to get its boots on. Cade's smirk wobbled. You talk big for someone who hides behind motorcycles. I don't hide, Kellen said simply. I arrive. Mercer turned to Loring for confirmation the way weak kings turn to jesters for policy. The deputy surprised them both. He didn't lie, Loring said. And she didn't either. He glanced at Cade's wrist, and what Kellen saw in the deputy's eyes wasn't courage, exactly. It was hunger for a self he could respect. Buck slammed a rag on the counter, playing the percussion part in a song nobody loved. You people bring trouble, he said. Always have. Trouble's a thing that's already in the room, Kellen said, and some of us refuse to pretend it's furniture. He stood, finally, because there are lines you don't deliver sitting down. He walked to the jukebox that still tilted a degree toward regret and slid 2 quarters into its throat. The machine coughed, then remembered how to be a cathedral. He punched 3 numbers nobody here had chosen in years. Music lifted like someone's daddy telling someone's daughter she can both run and rest. The door opened again. The trooper entered carrying daylight and paper. He handed the sheriff an envelope. State's taking this one, he said. You got a conflict. He didn't specify what kind, some conflicts were their family resemblance on their sleeves. And I'll be wanting your nephew in my car for a conversation that doesn't involve your office. Mercer puffed. Deflated. Read the first page and went suddenly very quiet in the way men do when a future they'd convinced themselves was guaranteed turns into work. Kellen didn't stay for the part where a lawman rediscovered the difference between fear and respect. He listened to the song through the first chorus. The dish kid wiped his eyes on a sleeve he pretended had an itch. A farmer at table 2 tapped the beat on Formica like he'd just remembered he had hands for something besides work. Outside, Kellen stood by the neon fork and let the morning's wind detail his face like a mechanic's cloth catches grease. His phone buzzed. A picture from Tomas of Rhea asleep with her hand curled on Marin's list, a dog at the foot of the bed that Kellen hadn't seen before because sometimes dogs come with salvation. The caption, safe. He breathed until his ribs stopped counting. Then he texted back one word the road had carved into his bones years ago. Always. A week later, the clinic cast came off and a different brace went on, one made of patience and instructions about not lifting anything heavier than hope. Rhea learned to open doors with her right elbow like a magician who prefers subtle tricks. Marin learned to curse at a stubborn bolt without sounding like a copy of a boy who'd never earned cussing as a language. Mrs. Darnell taught them both how to combine a pantry that looks empty with a supper that tastes like memory. Letters came. 2 from the DA's office. 1 from the state trooper with a note in a hand that had guided girls over creek crossings. A stack of receipts from women in 3 counties who bought coffee and tires and slipped cash into Rhea's palm without making it a sermon. Tomas refused money until Rhea yelled and threw a wrench with her weak hand and laughed when she missed and cried when she hit nothing. Kellen visited like weather, regular enough to plant by, irregular enough to remind you're not in charge. He ate at the church once, at a table where a boy asked if he rode dragons and a girl asked if he could teach her to fix the heavy things in a house that adults always call someone else to fix. He showed Marin where a bike keeps its balance and where a man does, lower than pride, higher than fear. He went back to the Blue Lantern on a Tuesday when he knew school let out and the little girl might have quarters. She ran the way children always run when they think a machine knows their name. He lifted her up so she could reach the numbers. She chose the same song he'd picked without knowing she was doing prophecy. It came on scratchy and perfect, and Buck pretended it sounded worse than it did and then hummed anyway because pretenses get tired. Loring nodded at Kellen when he came in now. Not friendly. Not hostile. Curious about the better version of himself he might yet audition for. The sheriff had less starch in his threats. Cade stopped coming by the diner except on days he wore humility like a shirt he hadn't yet grown into. Some boys learn by fire. Some by absence. The county learned by both. On a Friday when the air promised rain and delivered thunder instead, Kellen found Rhea behind Tomas's shop tracing letters on cardboard with a marker. He read the sign upside down. Sunday shelter. Open. You kept the words, he said, as if noticing a tattoo she'd moved from skin to sky. They kept me, she answered, not looking up from the careful way she outlined the S as if she were insisting on softness in a world that preferred corners. We'll make coffee. Offer rides to court. A place to breathe where nobody claims you for parts. You'll get pushback. She shrugged with one shoulder because the other was still learning its new limits. Pushback beats getting pushed. She glanced at him then, eyes steady in their gratitude. You going to tell me I don't owe you? You don't, he said. I don't, she agreed. But I keep debts the good way. By paying forward. She tapped the sign with the marker. Help me hang this? He took one end of the twine and she took the other, and they stood on ladders in a parking lot that smelled like rain about to forgive. He tied his not once, twice, 3 times for luck he doesn't believe in and faith he does. She tied hers once, pulled, and it held. They climbed down. They stood back. The letters looked homemade and professional at once, like the first sentence of a language you plan to become fluent in. Marin hooped from the doorway. Tomas grunted, which is a kind of applause. A dog barked approval. Kellen's phone buzzed before he could pocket the satisfaction. A number he recognized from the part of his life he almost never opened in daylight. He answered with that old single word. Yeah. Need a set of eyes, the voice said. Girl in over her head with a man who thinks ownership is love. Small town. Big badge. He closed his eyes, opened them, and saw the sign again against a sky practicing blue. He saw Rhea standing with the hand that had been broken on her hip now like authority she'd grown herself. He saw Marin reading Torque's specs aloud like poetry in the background. He saw the road running through it all like a sentence with no period yet. Text me the address, he said. I'll bring paper products. The voice chuckled. And engines? Only if quiet will be louder than noise, he said. We've got churches to keep clean. He hung up. Rhea was watching him with the knowing that comes from living through a night and waking up still yours. Another diner, she asked. Another county, he said. Same math. You going alone? Tomas asked, already not gathering men because he knew how to listen. Not yet. Kellen looked at the sign again and then at Mrs. Darnell's baseball bat propped in the church foyer across the street. Let's see if a phone call and a woman with a pen can do what a convoy did last time. He smiled a little. And if not, we know where the keys are. The rain started in that polite way southern storms sometimes begin, like clearing its throat before the song. They stood in it, not moving, 3 people and a dog and a sign, while the first drops dotted the cardboard letters and didn't smear. Rhea held her palm up and caught the weather she once would have called warning and now knew as washing. The road vibrated in Kellen's pocket the way a future vibrates in a choice. He felt for the keys, for the phone, for the weight he carried when he showed up and the weight he set down when he left. He thought about the words he'd offered Rhea in the alley and how she'd turned them into lumber and shelter. He thought about how all his life he'd been taught to arrive loud and how lately quiet had been doing better work with less collateral. He swung his leg over the bike. The engine came alive with the particular throat clearing that machine makes when it knows the difference between a ride and a mission. Rhea stepped close and set her unbroken hand on his forearm. Hey, she said, and he looked down at the place where their shadows touched. You don't have to carry it all. I know, he said. And he did. Knowing didn't lighten it. It made it worth the lift. He rolled out, tires whispering thanks to gravel that remembered 3 a.m. like a lullaby. The sign swung once in the post-storm wind. Marin cheered a weather report into a completely different kind of afternoon. Tomas went inside to put on coffee for a woman he didn't know yet and would stand between in a county line if it came to that. The highway opened. In his mirror, the blue lantern's neon knife flickered and then steadied like an old habit trying a new promise. The song the little girl loved found his head and played there without a jukebox to host it. He leaned into the curve, into the work, into the next town that didn't know yet it was ready to be braver than its sheriff. And as the horizon took him the way a patient mother takes a runaway back into her arms, the phone buzzed again, not a call, not a picture. A sentence. From Unknown, I saw what you did. I'm ready. He smiled without showing his teeth. Okay, he told the road. Let's go clean another spill. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.